Hello, I'm Kelly Taylor Wright, and this is Mainely Unspoken. Today our guest is Mark Finks, and he's going to be talking about unlawful money.
Lawful money.
Lawful money, okay.
If you have to know the lawful before you can know the unlawful, this is like knowing real from counterfeit. You know,
right.
Same thing.
So tell me, what is lawful money? Isn't that just the money we have when we pay for things at the store?
Well, it's a very important term. For those who have been following our series, and this, depending on how the local cable casters cast it, you may not have seen all of our other shows or not seen them recently, but this is part of a series on our government and our Constitution. And we've been saying for several weeks now that we use a principle in the United States which is very unique. We say that there are things that the Creator gave to us that no human can take away, the truly unalienable rights. And we were very unique in the history of the world in saying that there was not only right and wrong, but that God tells us what is right and wrong. And I would challenge the viewer again today to think this over. Maybe you don't know much about God or don't know what you believe. And if you don't, you might want to ask yourself what you believe, because in effect, the best protections in our Constitution have to do with faith in God. It's pretty hard to appropriate a protection if you don't believe there is such a thing as truth.
And it's what is right and what is wrong. You know,
Yes.
when you say unalienable rights,
Yes.
that's the right to work, the right to have property,
Yes.
the right to get married.
Yes. All the things that we would associate with normal life, what the Declaration of Independence referred to as the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
These rights, among them but not limited to them, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are very important things when you get to today's discussion, which is about lawful money. I'd remind people that when they train bank tellers to deal with paper currency, they don't show them tons of specimens of counterfeit currency. They carefully teach them what the genuine is. And therefore, it's pretty easy for them to spot counterfeit, because counterfeit doesn't match up very well compared with the genuine, or at least that used to be the teaching. Today they have some pretty clever computerized ways of doing things, so they make pretty good looking counterfeit, but it's in some ways not much better than the other paper money. So let's consider what the founders of the United States had facing them when they commenced their work, especially the participants in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. There were many very good reasons why that convention was called, but one of the very crucial reasons was that the United States did exist. We had won the war for independence in 1783, but we were having so much financial trouble. Our credit was ruined worldwide. We had a currency called the Continental currency, or Continentals, and on that paper money it said, this piece of scrip is redeemable in Spanish milled dollars, you know, real silver dollars.
Oh, wow.
There was just one slight problem. They didn't have any to redeem the paper.
So they were lying.
So, well, they meant well. What can I tell you? And that's where the expression "not worth a continental" came from. They had paid the soldiers who fought in the war for independence in continental currency, and the soldiers used to sew it on the outside of their clothing, you know, kind of the way you put shingles on a house, and they would walk down the street in their suits of continental money, making jokes about it, saying this is.
They couldn't buy anything with it?
It was a completely collapsed currency. It wouldn't do anything for them. And George Washington wrote confidentially to some of his friends, and he said, "I'm very worried about this situation. We could completely collapse because of it. Perhaps," he said, "perhaps the Constitution might save us." And that was one of the strongest motivations for having a constitutional convention, was trying to find a way to have a stable monetary system or system of exchange within the new country, because you just had to do that if anybody was going to believe that you were for real. So they set about doing that, and they had discussions about what kind of money the United States should use. And the founders of this country were very astute. They had read exhaustively and carefully the history of other civilizations, and they knew where other civilizations had fouled up. And one of the classic ways that civilizations destroy themselves is through destroying or debasing the value of their currency. Primarily coinage, because coins can be made of precious metals. They can have a milled edge so that you can't just keep paring or clipping metal off the edge of coins, each coin you handle, to wind up with your little pile of gold dust there and all this sort of thing. And to the extent that previous civilizations had had money of credible value inherent in the money itself, in the coin itself.
So you mean like gold or silver?
Gold or silver coins,
value?
Sure. A standard that was hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years old. To the extent that they had money of credible value, they did pretty well. And when they began to make alloys or use base metal for coins, they collapsed. And it was because of the financial uncertainty that debasing or debauching the value of the currency.
Because there was no value in it.
Nothing in the
coin. So if I give you a gold coin, you know, everyone accepts that that's a value. But if I give you a metal coin, well,
of unknown metal or aluminum or steel.
And what's the value behind it?
Nothing.
Nothing. Isn't that what we have today?
Nothing inherent, yes. And we're going to try to explain to people how we got there. Roger Sherman from Connecticut was one of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention who had the most to say about the lawful money question. And he said the only thing that would really serve the United States well was to simply prohibit any paper currency of any kind. He said that way nobody has to wonder if the guarantee on the paper is any good or not. When they're holding the coin in their hand, they know. And the whole point of that, and people would kind of think this through, is very clear, easy to understand. If the work that someone's going to do for you, or the service, the goods that they're going to provide to you, are always balanced against the effort that it takes to dig precious metal out of the ground, to assay the ore, to refine the ore, to make a metal ingot, strike it into a coin with a milled edge of known purity and all of that. If that effort is balanced against the effort that it takes to work or perform a good or service, you're going to have tremendous stability in the monetary system of the country. And for hundreds and hundreds of years before the existence of the United States, it was a very clear record that this was true. And in effect, they were saying, not only is this true, but this is the only form of money that the United States is going to have. And they stated this in the Constitution of the United States, which is a physically small document, folks, so you like to remind people it doesn't...
That's the whole Constitution.
It's the whole Constitution right here, and the Declaration of Independence in this little booklet. It doesn't take long to say the truth. It takes a long time to embroider, yeah, to make extensive lies. That's a topic for another show, you know. But under Article 1, which is the powers of the Congress, Section 8 enumerates a lot of different powers that the Congress has. But in Article 1, Section 8, it says the Congress shall have power, and one of the powers named is to coin money, not to print it, regulate the value thereof in a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. And the whole thrust of this statement is that there would be a certain number of grains of silver in a silver dollar, 377.5 grains of fine silver. But
that doesn't say that in the Constitution, does it?
No, it's established in the Coinage Act and so forth that flowed from Article 1, Section 8. Okay. When Congress exercised the power, they set the standard. So we had a dual metal standard, which is picked up at Article 1, Section 10, which refers to the prohibitions against conduct by the states. And part of the deal of forming the federal union was that the states agreed that they would give certain powers to the federal government. They would not engage in certain things themselves. And one of those was the monetary, exactly. It says no state shall, and then it enters into, it lists various things. No state shall coin money or make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts.
So no one can use anything but gold or silver to pay debts?
Well, the states can't.
The states can.
And if the states can't, then most of the rest of us won't. It's a very simple principle. You're not going to run your own system, even though the history of money in this country is a checkered history with banks issuing banknotes and all kinds of things going on, outrageous maneuvers that people tried to pull to beat the system somehow. And it's been quite a turbulent history for over 200 years, where there was so much power and influence involved with handling money and credit that, of course, everybody who wanted power would try to find a way to carve himself out a niche there somewhere. But in terms of what the founders of this country intended, it was very clear that they said, look, a currency which has the value in itself is the one that everybody will trust. That's going to make things stable and orderly, so that's what we want to have. And after the ratification of this Constitution in 1789, by 1791, 2 or 3, things were going so well that George Washington wrote again to his friends. He wrote these letters confidentially both times. He didn't want this nosed abroad exactly, but he said, you know, if anyone had told me a few years ago that our credit would be reestablished worldwide and that peace would be restored as it has been to our country, I'd have thought him a fit subject for a madhouse. In other words, crazy. We'll put him in a mental institution. He said, I'm amazed at how well this has worked.
Because they were using coins of value, gold and silver.
With inherent value in a knowable standard. In effect, it was a bimetallic standard. It says gold and silver coin, a tender in payment of debt. And we were quoting a dollar's weight of silver, 377.5 grains, and ounces of gold, a 1 ounce gold coin or fractional ounces, in dollars of silver.
So a dollar actually has a definition of what it is. It's a weight.
Sure does. It's a unit of weight.
So then how come we have these paper dollar bills?
That say they are a dollar?
Yeah.
Well, you have to kind of think that one through. The reader will have to, the viewer will have to kind of follow our language here. We'll repeat it a couple times and hope this is clear. But the present language on American paper money says this note is legal tender for all debts public and private.
But wait a minute, I thought you said that we could only use gold and silver according to the Constitution to pay our debts.
Quite right, and that's exactly what the Constitution says. There have been many battles over this during our history, but one of the great ones occurred at the time of the War of Secession, a better term than Civil War, since the South wasn't trying to capture Washington and run the government. They were trying to leave. They weren't trying to take us over. But during that time, when Lincoln asked the European banks what they would charge for interest to finance the War of Secession, they said as much as 33% interest.
Oh, wow.
Just sky high.
That's worse than today.
And Lincoln said, well, we can't do that. So he pondered the situation. He said, well, all right, perhaps we ought to issue gold notes, 100% backed by gold. And that's, in fact, what happened. Lincoln's Banking Act of 1863, they came up with this. And it caused a real ripple. There was a problem with the credibility and redeemability of those notes for a brief period of time. You can see that inflation was very flat up until the time of the War of Secession, and whoop, there's a little blip there with the concern over the gold notes, and the gold notes were paid off and made credible, and things simmered down again for a while after the Civil War.
So those gold notes, if I had a $10 gold note, I could turn it in for a $10 gold piece?
Exactly, a half-ounce gold piece at the United States Treasury.
Okay.
And that was the deal. So this first flirtation with paper money ended pretty well, but unfortunately Lincoln didn't survive to help repatriate the southern states, and there were lingering problems there. We have a very short show, so we can't go into a lot of historic detail, but a lot of the problems themselves that led up to the War of Secession actually were banking problems that had to do with money and the credibility of money and banking, banknotes. The fact that the United States had done away with its national bank under President Jackson, and
now, what did a national bank do for this country?
well, it provided a service, if you want to call it that, which had the power to control interest rates. And the founders of this country, many of them were completely opposed to that idea of having central authority in a national bank or banking system because of the power that gave the people who ran the banking system.
So that banking system is kind of like the Federal Reserve today?
The Federal Reserve was a phony attempt to make us think there were 12 separate entities instead of one de facto national bank.
Okay.
And we'll pick that up in just a moment. But at the time that the national bank was done away with prior to the Civil War, or the War of Secession, these same financial interests went into states, principally the southern states, and made state banks that were patterned after the national bank, which then extended a whole lot of credit to the southern plantation owners. And of course, the borrower becomes a slave to the lender, and if you took slaves away, the chattel slave property away from these plantation owners, they had no prayer of repaying those notes. They were financially ruined, and if you didn't pay them for the slaves, then they were doubly damaged. So here was this dilemma where someone, for various mischievous reasons, sowed some real seeds of discord in the South by doing all this lending. And it destabilized this country and split this country. And if you're an enemy, Lincoln said, I have two enemies. I have the Southern armies before me, and I have the European money powers at my back. And he said, of the two, the money powers are the more dangerous, because they were the ones who were fomenting this trouble, promoting
all the loans,
extensive borrowing and so forth that, of course, would tend to divide and conquer the United States. And once you could split it in half, you could split it in smaller pieces, and then there'd be no more country. And that was the issue that Lincoln had to deal with, a very difficult issue that forced him to make some choices he didn't want to make. But people need to think about this. This program deals with lawful money. And we've said that the Constitution says that lawful money is the gold or silver coin, a unit weight of silver equaling $1, and then a 1-ounce coin quoted in dollars of silver.
But still, during the Civil War, the War of Succession, we still had gold and silver money, or backed by gold.
Of course.
But loans got out of control.
Yes, well, and that was intentional, because if you're trying to become more influential and more powerful, one of the great ways to do it is by financial means. Who's going to notice that? We would ask that of the viewers today. Think about that. You know, how are you doing financially? This is shows made in the state of Maine. The state of Maine is facing, at the moment, this is the fall of 2002, we're facing a $240 million shortfall in our state budget, an immediate shortfall. Then for the next fiscal year that starts in 2003 and goes for 2 years, we're facing a $900 to $1,000 million shortfall in our state budget, which is $400 or $500 each year for every man, woman, and child in the state of Maine. And we're already the most heavily taxed state per capita in the United States of America. It's rather interesting that we are...
And is this all done because of loans? I mean, are we in trouble because of too many bonds? Or?
Well, perhaps we're most in trouble because once the currency is debased, then your troubles multiply rapidly after that.
When did the currency get debased?
Well, Nixon closed the gold window for international transactions in 1971, about 31 years ago. And if people will think back to the tax and price situation that existed in 1971, they'll be a little surprised. For example, gold, at the time Nixon closed the gold window, was $35 U.S. per ounce.
Wow, that's cheap.
Well, it sure looks cheap compared to today. Here we are 31 years later, and gold is at $310, $315 an ounce. It's been as high as $800 at times. So this is not a healthy or stable situation. And if people look at the price of automobiles, the typical American minivan today with some nice options in 2002 cost what it took to buy an entire dairy farm with the cows and the tractors in 1960.
So you're telling me that as long as we were on the gold standard, it kept inflation in check, but as soon as you went off the gold standard, prices went out of sight?
Just took off. And the spending that the country was doing made that inevitable.
But I don't understand. It says in the Constitution our money has to be backed by gold. I mean,
This says our money has to be gold or silver.
It has to be gold. How did we get away from that?
Well, there's an irresistible temptation that afflicts all politicians and all of us regular types too, as we always hope for more or want more. And one way to give people the subjective impression that they've achieved more is to just give them more money to put in their hand. And the only way you can do that is inflating the currency. You have to start running the printing presses with a paper currency, in effect, and put a lot of paper out there, or a lot of checking deposit balances, which is actually the way it's handled today. If we had actually printed the amount of paper money represented here, it would be blowing around the streets like snowdrifts. We'd be plowing it with snow plows, but instead we've got it flying through various checking accounts for the government, industry, and private citizens. So we don't see it.
But I don't understand. Did Congress just put a new law and say we don't have to use gold anymore? I mean, how did they go against the Constitution? I mean, that's a huge thing.
They suspended the use. This standard still exists and has never been repealed. The bimetal standard. It's a gold and silver standard, and its use has been suspended on a daily basis. Perhaps I ought to give the redeemability legend that the Federal Reserve notes had back in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s, up to about the early mid-50s. You could look at a $10 bill or a 5 and see this. People are pretty familiar with the silver certificate, the blue seal $1 certificate that we used to use prior to 1963. And those silver certificates said there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand.
So you could take a $1 bill back in the 50s, or a $5 bill, and turn it and get silver.
You could get silver coins, and people in their pockets were carrying around 90% silver coins of the correct weight until very recently. The silver content was not reduced and eliminated until 1964.
But how did they get away with it? How did they suddenly say we're going to change the value of our money?
It's a matter of timing and strategy as much as anything else. If you stop teaching these things to the American people, and if people are no longer God-respecting and don't believe there is such a thing as truth, if those numbers are diminished, which is certainly true in modern America, you can get away with all kinds of things. And the political and financial apparatus is always gauging that in terms of what people are going to put up with. Because remember, in terms of the bigger ball game, you want everybody buying a house and a couple cars and some furniture on time and other things. Why? That's a better standard of living. And they're all happy as long as they can keep their payments going. And that makes people think that they're affluent. They may in fact not be, but their standard.
So everybody's 2 paychecks away from poverty, right?
Right. Well, the standard of living is up there, so they're happy. And the politicians and financial people gauge all this. There's no question that central finance and certain political forces become more powerful when the people have more debt. And we eventually got to the point by 1971 when debt was the money. Instead of being $1 in silver, an ounce coin of gold quoted in dollars of silver, it was paper that wasn't redeemable. It's, I owe you $1 plus interest. It's monetized debt. It's debt turned into money.
Right. Our system today is a debt system.
This is based entirely on monetized debt.
And according to history, the reason why we didn't go back in George Washington's days is because all those financial monetary systems failed. They all bellied up.
We said we're not going there, and yet here we are.
And it will belly up. I mean, how can it go on forever? It can't.
Well, what the Federal Reserve notes said, you gave a private banking system a de facto monopoly which they could use to print money, and they did that. They called them notes, even though they really weren't in the classic sense of the word. But the legend on those paper notes said, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury or any Federal Reserve Bank.
So at one time, it recognized what lawful money was.
Sure, and used the term right on the currency.
But that ended when? In the 60s they
Well,
stopped writing that?
in the early 50s, those legends began dropping off, and the legend said, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." Now, in effect, what that's saying is, and the use of the word legal and lawful is very significant. Legal says, okay, if you want to tender or offer, here's tendering. I'm offering you something. I can do it, and the government won't chase me for doing it. You don't have to accept it if you don't want to. You don't have to give me anything for it, particularly if you don't want to. It's all strictly voluntary. It's up for grabs here. So that's a system we've been using for quite a lot of years, but certainly 30 or 40. The nothing one came out on the heels of John Kennedy's assassination. They had a warehouse full of these $1 bills that did not have the redeemability legend, the old silver certificate ones, that just said, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." And they issued them November 25th when we were all watching John Kennedy getting buried, so nobody was paying attention.
That's the first time it came out?
That's the first time those came out, yes.
Wow.
It was a little experiment. It worked pretty well.
It kind of sounds like the frog story in the pot of water.
Cooking the frog,
Cooking the frog.
in the big cauldron, yes.
Yeah, first they got us away from the gold and silver, and then they got us to these paper notes that looked like Federal Reserve notes, but it said we could redeem it for silver. Then they sort of took that one little statement off, and soon we have totally worthless money.
That's a pretty good description. And the naysayers say, so what? You know, I can buy things and I can do this and do that. But I think anybody with any degree of candor today is willing to admit that the system doesn't look very healthy.
Right.
We've got all these huge numbers stuck on everything, on our cars and houses and all the rest of it.
Overinflated?
The taxes are sky high. Everybody knows the stock market was ballooned way up and fell back and so forth. So clearly there's something wrong with what we're doing, and what we're doing is following the classic patterns of previous empires which have vanished. You can go to certain parts of the world, like where Babylon used to be, and it's just desert, with the notable exception of the buildings that Saddam Hussein built, thinking he was going to bring back ancient Babylon and its splendor. That was one of his little projects, but thus far it hasn't really prospered. Basically, that empire is gone, and they used the system where the priesthood and the Babylonian mystery religion got to keep all the gold, and the people had the worthless temple tokens to play with out there on the, you know, walking around money. Same kind of thing that we have now. I always kid people a little and say, well, what do you think they did with the gold and silver when we stopped using it for money? Did they stick it all back in the ground, or what did they do with it? No, it's out there somewhere. Somebody owns it, some clever person. And, you know, perhaps it's not the greatest investment in the world in the sense that it doesn't pay you interest, but if you look at the disparity, the guy who bought $35 an ounce gold in 71 is not hurt today at $320 or $30. So wise is he who watches, and lawful money still looks the best if you look at it closely.
Well, so what's the one thing you want everybody to remember about lawful money?
That it's real and that it works, where the stuff we're using today is rather unreal and works poorly, if at all.
And could vanish before their
Could
very
vanish
eyes.
overnight, that's right.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mark.
It's a pleasure. Enjoy doing these.
You want to think about that, you know, what is your money worth? Look at the old bills from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s and see what it says on those old bills that it doesn't say today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.